Something happened to you recently. Maybe it was at work. Maybe it was in a conversation at home. Someone said something that landed wrong, and for just a second your face shifted. Your voice changed. You responded a little faster than you meant to. Nobody called it out. The moment passed. But something happened in that room that you did not see. The people around you made a decision about you. Not about what you said, about you, about how much weight to put behind your words the next time you speak, about how much space you actually occupy in that room. That decision took about 2 seconds to make, and it had nothing to do with whether you were right. There are 7 specific places where composure either builds your presence or quietly dismantles it. Today, you are going to see all 7. The first method, the facial gap. Before any word leaves your mouth, before you decide what to say, your face has already said something. There is a gap between the moment you receive information and the moment you respond. For most people, that gap is reactive. The face reflects the input almost immediately. A jaw that tightens slightly, eyes that harden before the brain has finished deciding what to do with what it just heard. Behavioral research on status perception shows that observers form a judgment in the first 1 to 2 seconds of watching someone receive a challenge or a piece of bad news. They are not waiting for the verbal response. They are reading the face to determine whether the person in front of them is operating from threat or from stability. What composure in that gap looks like is this. The face receives the information, and it holds. No collapse, no visible hardening, just a flat, steady expression that communicates one thing to the room, that whatever just happened was not sufficient to shift you. The man who holds that gap consistently, under disrespect, under bad news, under a direct challenge to his position, he builds something in that room that language alone can never fully build. Second, vocal load response. When pressure enters a conversation, most people's voice changes, not dramatically, nothing anyone would call out directly. The pitch climbs slightly, the pace accelerates, the volume either drops to something that sounds like deference or rises to something that sounds like defense. None of it is intentional. It is what happens when the body reads a social interaction as a threat. The voice of a composed man under pressure does something different. The pace slows, not from hesitation, from ownership. There is a real difference between a voice that slows from not knowing what to say and a voice that slows from not needing to rush. Observers read that difference without being aware they are reading it. The rushed pace registers as someone trying to outrun something. The controlled pace registers as someone who is not rattled. Here is what this looks like in practice. A hostile question gets asked in a room. The composed response starts with 1 full beat of silence before the first word comes out. The voice stays at its natural register. The sentence is shorter than the question, and it ends without rising intonation. No apology in the delivery, just the answer. Third method, the strategic delay in any tense exchange. The person who responds last is almost always perceived as the most powerful person in the room. Most people understand this in theory. Almost no one executes it under real pressure. The moment silence opens in a confrontation, the instinct is to fill it, to explain, to defend, to get ahead of what is coming. The silence feels like a hole in the floor. The brain reads it as something that needs to be resolved immediately. But silence under pressure is not empty. It is information. It tells the room that what was just said did not produce urgency in you, that you are processing from a position of calm rather than reacting from a position of pressure. The man who holds silence after a provocation, after a challenge, after being publicly questioned, he forces the other person to sit in the full weight of what they just said. He does not rescue them from that weight by responding quickly. He lets it stay in the room. Watch what happens in that silence. The person who fired the provocation usually fills it themselves, with explanation, with softening, with backtracking. He let them dismantle their own position without saying a word. Fourth, the disrespect non-event. When someone disrespects you and you do not react, you do something almost no one does. You make the disrespect bigger, not by responding to it, by treating it as insufficient to disturb you. The reactive person makes disrespect smaller. The moment they respond, they confirm that the insult was strong enough to land. The composed person leaves the disrespect sitting in the room, unaddressed, and it stays there in full weight with the person who fired it. The identity-based challenge is a specific test. Someone questions who you are, your intelligence, your standing, your judgment. The purpose of that challenge is to produce a visible reaction. The reaction is the objective. If there is no reaction, there is no objective met. What happens next is what most people miss. The person who fired the challenge now has to sit in a room where nobody reacted, where you did not validate their move by engaging it. That is a social position with no clean exit from it. You did not argue. You did not defend. You did not participate in a transaction that was designed to cost you something. By not engaging, you charge them the full cost instead. If these first four are making sense, stay with me. The next three are where most men lose the most ground without realizing it. Fifth method, the room anchor. In any environment under pressure, one person sets the emotional temperature of that room. It is not the loudest person. It is not the person with the most formal authority. It is the person who does not match the emotional escalation of the people around them. This is how emotional contagion works in a group under stress. People scan the room for cues about how alarmed to be. They read the faces and behavior of others and calibrate their own response to what they observe. If everyone is escalating and one person holds steady, that person becomes the reference point the room is trying to figure out. The composed man in a high-tension environment is not detached. He is not uninvested. He is operating at a frequency that does not match the panic around him, and that frequency pulls the room toward it over time. This is one of the most observable translations of composure into direct influence. The man who stays level while everyone else breaks does not need to say anything to take authority in that room. He just needs to stay level long enough for the room to start orienting toward him. That cannot be performed for a single night. It has to be built. Sixth, the explanation reflex. There is a specific moment in most conversations where composure either holds or breaks completely. It is the moment you feel the urge to explain why you felt something, or why you did something, or why you said something. Here is what that looks like. You set a position, someone pushes back on it, and the instinct is to justify the position, to give context, to offer reasoning that makes the decision feel more legitimate to the other person. That explanation is a signal to the room. What it communicates is that your first word was not sufficient on its own, that you needed the explanation to carry weight the original statement could not carry alone. The moment that signal goes out, the room begins adjusting how much they need to honor what you said. The composed man sets a position. The position stands. If there is pushback, he does not add more language to it. He holds it. This is not coldness. It is not arrogance. It is a precise understanding that the explanation was never going to generate more respect than the original position would have produced on its own. Every word added after the position is a cost to the position. The composed man does not pay it. Seventh method, the recovery signal. Everyone breaks under sufficient pressure. That is not a failure. It is what pressure does at a certain threshold. The question that separates the composed man from the performer is not whether the break happens. It is what happens in the 30 seconds after. The performer recovers visibly. An apology tour, an explanation of what happened and why, an extended display of having processed and corrected course. That recovery is its own signal. It communicates that the break was an event, that it requires active management, that something is still unresolved. The composed man returns to baseline without announcement. No extended processing, no visible evidence of the break. He simply re-enters the room at his normal operating frequency. That return is the actual signal, not the break itself. The break is human. The return without residue is the thing people store. It communicates something that no amount of sustained composed behavior beforehand can fully produce on its own. That the composure is structural, not performed. The man who can be visibly rattled and then return to baseline without making the recovery into its own performance. That is the man the room never quite figures out. That uncertainty is one of the most durable forms of authority a person can hold. Most people who just went through those 7 mechanisms will assume they pass most of them. Research on social self-perception shows that people consistently overestimate their own composure. Not from arrogance, from the fact that we evaluate ourselves from the inside. The room evaluates us from the outside. Those are 2 different reads of the same person. The diagnostic is simple. In the last 72 hours, did you explain an emotional reaction to someone? Did you respond before a full breath in a conversation that felt like a challenge? Did you match the elevated tone of another person when you could have held your own? If the answer to any of those is yes, you have your primary leak point. The work is not to rebuild from the ground up. It is to locate the one mechanism that is costing you the most in the rooms you are already in. Repair that one. The others tend to follow from it. That is how commanding presence is actually built, not through philosophy, not through a performance, through one held moment at a time in rooms where nobody tells you they noticed, but where everyone adjusts accordingly.